This is the D6 generation. Dice are our vice. Creating not too horrible content since 2008.
Are you crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Oh, I think we're well past that.
D6G Hot Take.
Welcome to another D6 Generation Pip. Today, we're going to be talking to Brandon from Winged Hussar Publishing. Is it Hussar or Hussar?
Potato. I think it's correctly pronounced Hussar. I call it Winged Hussar.
Okay.
Just fine, but either way.
Okay, because Vince was throwing me off when we went to Historicon, and I was like, I've been saying Hussar for about 10 years, but that's okay. And very excited to talk to Mark Barber, one of the authors that works extensively with Winged Hussar. So Brandon, they've already heard your voice. How you doing?
Doing really good. Yeah, everything's been great.
Excellent. And Mark, welcome to the show.
No, thanks very much. It's great to be here. It's great to finally talk to you too.
And as you can see, or hear, I should say, Mark is from across the pond. And has taken time out of the middle of his day so that Brandon and I don't have to get up at a ridiculously time in the morning. So first up...
It is a walking cliche over here right now. It's everything you'd expect from England. It is chucking it down with rain. It's perfect.
Oh, is it really?
Oh, yeah. It always is. It always is.
Okay. It's a fine, soft day then. So first of all, Brandon, we've talked before on the podcast. And so what have you been up to lately?
Lately, it's just been busy. Got lots and lots in my editing queue that never slows down. So right now, I'm working on Kings of War. Just finished our latest Infinity novel, Earhart, by John Levy, and now I'm back into Kings of War again. So it's just constantly churning out books and churning out working with authors on their edits.
Awesome. So you're primarily the main editor now?
Yeah, for our fantasy and sci-fi, I'm the head editor for that branch. So I specifically kind of tackle our tabletop tie-ins. I'm not really so much focusing on the standalone stuff right now. It's just Kings of War and Infinity are my two head series that I'm kind of devoted all my time to.
Excellent. Awesome. And so, Mark, you are new to the show. So as our tradition dictates, I must ask you now, Mark, are you now or have you ever been a gamer?
Yes.
All right, moving on.
Yes. Could I go into more detail?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yeah, sure thing. I started with this whole hobby when I was about 10 years old. So primary school over here, we had, and I think every class has got him, a compulsive liar. So the guy who'd... You come in and he said, he kind of made this bold announcement about Games Workshop. This is going back to like 1990. So it's pretty early days. And my dad, bless him, he got me a copy of the original, as it was called then, Space Marine. So what is now Epic. And so I got into that, realised that the other guy didn't play and didn't collect at all. It was just lying. And so it was sort of me spearheading the Games Workshop movements in the last year of primary school. That went into secondary school. So got it. It was the whole back catalogue of GW stuff. We all played it as a group up until about 16, 17. Then I guess priorities started to change. I went to university at 18. I interviewed for a part-time job at the Games Workshop store. I got it, but they said, well, we never expect you to turn up because if you're going to university, you're going to be interested in drinking and girls, and you won't turn up. And I'm sad to say they were entirely correct. That's exactly what happened. I never showed up. And the hobby died for me for about 15 years.
Oof.
No, maybe not. 10 years, I reckon. And then the world changed, because I remember kind of in secondary school, you were ostracized for this. It was, nerdy, geeky, and then all of a sudden the world changed, and it's like no one cares now, and no one gives you a hard time for it. And actually, where I worked, the amount of probably about 80% of people I knew at one point were coming out of the wargaming closet and getting back into it post kids and stuff like that. So yeah, I play a lot more systems now though. So I dabble with the GW stuff, but it tends to be more other systems these days, and I'm still playing a lot.
Awesome. What are you playing most recently?
Most recently, I have just bought the intro set to Blood and Plunder, so I am just assembling my first stuff for that. But before that, I've been through. It's been a big nautical phase. I've been playing a lot of Black Seas and Kings of War Armada.
Awesome. You are in for a treat with Blood and Plunder. Not only because the game system is very, 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 very good, but that starter box is phenomenal. It used to be a lot harder to find ships that size, and now when you got two right out of the box, that's fantastic. In fact, I'm hoping to be talking to Mike from Firelock in my next segment. But regardless, anyway, here we are now talking to you guys. And so, Mark, so awesome. So clearly your bona fides, as they say, are established as a gamer. Talk a little bit about how did you become a writer? A lot of people, especially in the gaming world, like to write, love to write, want to think of themselves as writers one day. Very few people take the next steps required to become a writer, or even fewer to be published. So how did that journey take place?
Oh man, it's this. I could fill up such a long segment with it, so I'll try and keep it brief. I guess secondary school kind of teen years, I dabbled in writing and stuff. It was just interesting to me. Got to university and we had to pick minor modules to go with our major. So everyone else, because mine was very kind of social science based, everyone else was going with stuff which went with that. But I saw creative writing was on the list. So I thought, no, I really want to go for that. So I did 3 years of minoring in creative writing at university, at college. And I thought, cool, that's something I want to do on the side. So I did this normal thing that a lot of people do, which is 2 to 3 years of dozens of rejections of every literary editor under the sun saying, no, I don't like it, you 3 chapters, and then gave up. And Q had about 6 years, and an opportunity presented itself to have a go at non-fiction. So I started writing for Osprey Publishing, which was I was writing a lot of Second World War and First World War military aviation history. Did a little bit of consultancy work, and then Osprey signed on to print and distribute for Warlord Games. So there was a segue neatly into that, and I wrote some stuff for Bolt Action. So 5 campaign books for Bolt Action. And it was via that, through a briefly run game called Gates of Antares, that I met Brandon and Vince. And that kind of, without going too far into it, that sort of brings us up to speed, I suppose. It was via that network of contacts.
That's awesome. So when you were doing the campaign books and things like that, were you doing rules, or were you doing sort of like color commentary? Were there any sort of, like, I know some of those books have little bits and pieces of short story kind of historical fiction elements to them. Were you able to do any of that?
This was the weird thing. There was no fiction whatsoever. So this is why it's always been a bit kind of crazy when I've worked with Corvus Belli and Mantic and other companies. And I totally get why they see me as a fiction writer. And they're saying I've actually got more book sales writing rules for war games, but they don't want to know. It's just like I can't do this stuff, I've done more of it than the fiction, but I'm the fiction guy now. So yeah, the Bolt Action stuff. To do a campaign book, you research the history of the campaign. You write as plain a narrative as you can, but gearing it towards, if it's a tactical, operational, strategic level game, so Bolt Action, platoon level, very tactical. So you're trying to gear your telling of history at the 28mm scale to make sure it links with the war game. Then it's writing scenarios and new units, new army lists, new rules, stuff like that.
Gotcha. So would you say like a key element to your success was being willing to sort of expand your target range, what you were looking to do, and then sort of like, so this, as a teacher, I'm always telling my students that one key way to succeed, especially in the arts and creative endeavors, is to sort of expand your horizons and work at whatever work presents itself and slowly sort of leverage that into the next step, getting towards what you want to do. Is that kind of how it feels it went for you, or is it more just serendipity?
A bit of both, I think, but mainly the first one. I think it's exactly as you say. It's building a CV.
Right.
If you've got your sights on here's what I want to do, you're going to be pretty lucky to turn up and just go, okay, I've got no writing background. I've never published anything. Here's what I want to do, and you're going to let me do it. Probably not going to happen. So it's a case of building up that CV. And as it was with Winged Hussar, when Gates of Antares was very new, I wrote some, because I'd done the bolt action stuff.
Yeah.
For one of their factions, I wrote, here's how I would make the army lists for it. And because I'd done this fiction 3 years of it back at university, I wrote a short story for it. And the guys kind of came back and said, yeah, we really didn't like your army list at all, but the short story was good. We all like that. So here are these guys, Winged Hussar. Why don't you talk to them? Because the first compilation was coming out. So, but that was very much, and Brandon will have way more information on this, but certainly from my point of view, that was a competition, not an opportunity. It was just get in line, write your stuff, see if you're good enough. And if you're good enough, you'll make it into the book. So it was just diving in with everyone else to have a crack at it.
But you got that introduction though through all the work that you'd done previously for them, which is great. Brandon, you want to tell us a little bit about what it was like from the other side of the screen when those stories came through?
Well, Craig, as you know, our first big IP we worked with was Wild West Exits.
Yes.
And that was very close-knit, and that was kind of everything was kind of already decided for us, and we didn't have too much creative freedom to do what we wanted to do with it.
Yeah.
When we stepped into Antares, it was all new territory, and we kind of didn't have anybody to turn to say, do you want to write the book? So the first thing we did is we said, all right, we're going to put out we're going to put out a call to submission for short stories and see what we get. We got so many short stories, we said, okay, we're going to do 2 anthologies because there was just such a great number. It was a little daunting because I don't think in any of our other anthologies we've got the number of submissions, even with Infinity. We didn't get the number of submissions that we got with the Antares. I had to have a Dropbox folder and just go through each one and look and say, all right, this one's got some promise. This one needs to be reworked. This one's great. This one's got skill. And so it was very tough deciding who I wanted to pick to be in the anthologies. And Mark stood out. I think he was one of the first ones I picked and said, yes, this guy I want to be in the anthology. And I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but your story opened one of the 2, I think the first anthology, I think it was one of the opening stories. And
it was certainly, I can't remember if it was the first, but it was the first 1 or 2 stories of the first anthology.
So I really was like, you know what, I when we finished the anthology, I kind of went to some of the authors and was like, all right, so you've got talent I'd like to pursue with a novel. And I didn't extend that invitation to too many people. I extended it to maybe like 2 or 3 of the top authors I felt were in the competition. Mark obviously went on to write a novel for us. One of the other people dropped out of their contract, and the third one wasn't necessarily interested in pursuing a novel. So Mark was the only one of those people who went on to actually
very interesting.
write a novel. And then, and he went on to head the next 2 franchises we worked with. He wrote he unintentionally wrote the starter novel for Kings of War. We had to jig the schedule around, so his was actually supposed to be, I think, the 3rd, but we ended up pushing it to the first one, and it ended up being one of the best received in the Kings of War novels. And then, because of that, we purposely put Mark as the first novel for Infinity. But honestly, I think it was I think your and his novels were very close to like being released at the same time, and then because of COVID and everything else, we had to move the schedule around.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mark has led 3 of our franchises with novels.
That's all. Now, it's awesome. Did you know at all that he had that prior relationship, or this is all again, all you do all that foundational work, and basically what it does is put you in the position then to be noticed by the right people.
So with me, I didn't really know about his prior historical stuff. That kind of came out afterwards, and after we got to know each other and talk to each other, I just looked at the short story and said, this is the talent that I can see from just this one story. And I'm very big on taking a chance with people, so in any of our anthologies, I usually offer one or two, sometimes three people the chance to go on to write a novel if they've never published anything with us, because that's kind of what we look for in those anthologies is new talent.
Yeah.
Usually we do anthologies because we either are looking to expand our current author bank, we don't have any other authors that are currently interested in writing for the franchise, or we're just looking to try to build relationships with the community. And that's really helped us a lot because we've taken a lot of authors from each of the communities and brought them in to write a full novel. With like Kings of War, for example, I reached out to Ben Stoddard, who's another one of our authors, and he wrote the second novel for the Kings of War line, and he's gone on to now write our current novel that's going to be coming out at the end of December, which is a big lore novel to push the dwarf faction and expand on all that. He started out as a big fan of the franchise who had done fan fiction, went on to publish a novel with us, and now is writing some of the bigger lore for the game. So I like making those connections like that. It's really cool to see.
The anthology idea seems like a fantastic, any one of those three purposes would absolutely justify doing all of that work. And I know that it's hard work, but the fact that you can leverage it for all three of those is really interesting. And so, I mean, and actually hits a target I wasn't even aiming for today, which would be if you're interested in writing, these anthologies would be a very good way of trying to get into it. I also found it interesting what you said, where you offered 3 chances of writing a novel and 2 of them faded away, because that's my experience. I just, through the years, I've been given a few opportunities to help people along the way and introduce them. And every one of those opportunities where I've been able to go, oh, hey, you always wanted to be a writer, and I don't have time to take this contract, but this guy's interested in taking a meeting. Every one of those falls apart, because when you get right down to it, it's not easy to write this stuff. So that's interesting. Now, how often do you guys do anthology? This is totally off. Now I'm off the beaten track, but you know what? I think it's worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, it depends. I've been trying not to do anthologies too often just because our schedule is so packed. But actually, again, coming full circle, Mark is leading an anthology we're doing for Kings of War right now for the Armada line.
Oh, great.
With the Kings of War books, it's all the world is called Panathor, and whether it's Kings of War, Dungeon Saga, or Armada, the Mantic wants it all to tie back into one big world. So they don't necessarily want us to specify books as one game system, but even though this is going to all take place in Panathor, the focus of this is to support the Armada game system.
Right. So naval stories,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Mark was the one to spearhead that idea because he was playing Armada and wanted to see more interest in it, because he wrote an Armada book that launched with the game called Pious. And so Mark had the idea, hey, how about we do an anthology? And I'm like, it's a lot of work. If you're willing to take it on, you're more than happy to, lead the anthology. So that's what Mark's currently working on. In addition to like 4 other novels he's working on with us, including a sequel to his first Armada novel. So it kind of comes full circle. Is Mark came to us as a short story submission in the anthology, and now he's spearheading and editing and putting together an anthology for us.
It all comes down to hard work, doesn't it, Mark?
Yeah, a bit too much. Brandon was entirely right. It's so annoying. I hate that guy. He's always right. And I just say, come on, how hard can it be? I'm going to have a great time, sifting through other people's short stories. And a short story, you don't have to invest as much effort in that, because just by the word count, you can't get that far into it. So all I'm going to have is about 10 these little short stories to have a look through and go, no, that's the wrong terminology in boaty speak. But no, once again, I'm entirely wrong, and Brandon's entirely right. It is a ton of work. It's a ton of work, but still, it's good fun. And I've met some other people who we've got a little group on Facebook to swap ideas and have chats about, and it's all worth it. It's cool.
I'm totally for doing the anthologies to bring new talent into us and giving people a chance, but that's just the only reason why I try not to do it too often. Maybe once a year, once every 2 years, is because it's just a lot of work, because a lot of them are first time authors, and it's nothing. I like, again, I'm all for taking chances on people and helping people like advance their writing career, but these are people who haven't ever published anything a lot of the time, so you have to structure it to be like a normal short story, and then B, structure it the way that we structure things, which isn't radically different, but just like U.S. grammar versus UK grammar, for example. Certain wordings that I'm very specific on because things fluctuate. Craig, as you know, I'm towards and toward. And
Yeah, I don't want to So moving on.
But yeah, that's the big issue. So it's like, I love doing it, but in the same token, we limit it because of how much work goes into it.
Right. I would also imagine that you don't want to go to that well too often with your readers, right? If you just start churning out anthologies, first of all, you've got to be very careful about the quality. There can't be a million short story writers out there just waiting, right? But also, you don't want to become the company that's just doing, anthologies. I just want to go back just very, very briefly to Gates of Antares. Mark, did you ever play Gates of Antares when you wrote that short story?
Yeah, any franchise I get involved in at all, I'll play it. I totally know that there's a good number of authors on Winged Hussar's books, on anyone's books, who have this ability to just have a look through the lore and then get stuck in and write it. For me, I guess it's my processes. I want to have a basic knowledge of the game as an absolute starter, and any faction I'm trying to depict, I'll buy a couple of box sets and assemble them and paint them, because that's when you start to notice the little bits of gear and that sort of stuff, and get the vibe and the feel for it. So yeah, the same as Kings of War, Armada, Infinity, all of them. I've played them all.
That's awesome.
To a greater or lesser extent. Yes, some of them not so much, not as much as others. But I'll certainly at least give it a shot to really try and get into any and all of them.
Right. I just asked because it was a really big game locally for a little while. When it first came out, we had everybody on the design team. We had them on. We talked about it a lot. I had a huge army. Russ had a huge army. We played a lot of games, got a lot of terrain. It went the way of most miniatures games. It gets played a lot and then it gives way to the next new fancy thing. But we really did enjoy it when it was first out. Do they still even make it anymore? I don't know.
It is still being made, I believe. There's a subsidiary company, Skytrack, something like that. Yeah, that's it. They're still distributing the models, as far as I'm aware. But
okay.
Past that, I don't know.
They're not creating any new models, to my knowledge. I think a lot of it's STL.
Oh, gotcha.
Skytrax is still distributing the models, but I don't think they're creating anything new. I have seen they're still working on new rules.
Yeah.
I know there's STL files I've seen, but I don't think they're officially putting out new models, at least through World.
Yeah. That's what. It was a great game with some really neat, innovative mechanics, as we say. But hey, it got you started, Mark, and that's what the literary world cares about the most. So from that Gates of Antares anthology, you went right. What was your first Kings of War novel?
So I read a Kings of War novel called Steps to Deliverance, which was great fun to write, really tricky. And I think comparing that to Downfall, without going too much into that, it's sort of the lead. They were both sort of lead novels. They were lead Winged Hussar novels, but both franchises had had fiction with other companies before, be it in-house or not.
Right.
But it was two completely different approaches, because one of them, Kings of War, I think back in the day, it's gone a very different direction now, and I think in a good way. But back in the day, it was marketing itself to say, whatever system you play, whatever army you've got, if it's 28 mil fantasy, historic, whatever, just get stuck in. So it deliberately, there wasn't really much lore. They were trying to keep it free and easy and open. And so if you try and write a novel for something which deliberately has avoided committing itself to lore and canon and background, that's tricky. And that was really difficult. And then conversely, Infinity was the exact opposite. It was just like, I want to write about this tiny, tiny, tiny corner of Infinity. How many pages of lore is there for this? Well, about 48,000.
Yeah.
So it's two completely different challenges.
No, it's interesting that you're saying that about Mantic, because I never even thought about it from a writer's point of view. I mean, the company really got its start by being an alternative miniatures company to GW, right? I remember when they first crashed onto the scene with their dwarves. One of the hosts here at the D6G, Rafe, was a huge fantasy dwarf fan for Warhammer, and the first model I ever saw of Mantic was there's a war dog, or there was a war dog with their first box set of dwarves that had a handle, so the champion of the unit could literally throw the war dog into another unit. There were no rules for it because, again, there were literally no rules at all. It was just, hey, Games Workshop wants you to pay $5 a plastic model. We're gonna charge you $2 per plastic model, and you can have made a lot of cool, and we'll add cool details. And they sort of slowly segued into, hey, I think we have enough models now to start our own system. And then, of course, with Games Workshop turning away from the classic rank and file system, Mantic really sort of stepped in and filled that niche. I never thought about the challenge of them wanting to sort of establish themselves, but at the same time not alienate that segment of their business, which was, hey, we don't really care what system you're using. Use our models. They're great. So that's interesting also. But now that you mention Infinity, let's talk about that for a little bit. First, Brandon, can you talk a little bit about how did that even happen? So Infinity, right? Corvus Belli has been around for a long time. I remember them having a booth back in my first convention was my first big convention was Gen Con in 2008, and I remember them having a booth, and they were around a lot longer before. And of course, now having worked with them, I know they've been around even longer than that. How does Winged Hussar and Corvus Belli, how do they link up?
So that's an interesting story. It's mostly thanks to Mark. We're looking to see what we could expand into, especially with the Ataris. We saw the writing on the wall with them, and we were like, this is not going in the way we wanted to. So Mark and I were talking, and we were looking at what other franchises we hadn't really hit, and we're kind of getting known for being the company that provided background material and fluff for any other tabletop game that wasn't Games Workshop. At the time, we had just put out a novel for Ethereum, which we still have a sort of working deal with them, even though the company has sold. So there's a couple other niche games that we do. I don't work with those ones. That's mostly like Vince's territory. So Mark said, I know of this game called Infinity, and it's pretty big. I'm like, I haven't heard of it, but I've seen the models sort of, but I haven't really delved deep into it because, I've seen them at Adepticon and other shows. So I kind of looked them up at the Contact Us and reached out to them and said, hey, this is what we do. We provide novels, and you have graphic novels, but you don't have written novels. Is this something you want to get into? And they got back to me pretty quickly and said, yeah, sure, let's look into this. So it kind of was just an off chance comment by Mark, and I said, yeah, they've got some really cool models. They're a great company. I'll reach out to them. So it was just 2 emails later, and we're like, hey, we've got a deal going now.
That's fantastic. As they say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
And it's true, because I've reached out to a lot of other companies because I've tried to get into video gaming and stuff like that, and I don't hear anything back. So it was just a random chance, and they actually got back to me, which is great.
That's fantastic, and such a cool partnership as well. So that's awesome. Corvus Belli's been around forever, and an excellent segue, Mark, into. So you talked a little bit about your work with Mantic. How was your work with? How did you find working with Corvus Belli?
I found it really good. It was really different to how Mantic do their thing. And I think that's great because each of these companies that you work with, they've got their own slant on how they're going to approach things.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the most enjoyable thing, the best thing I found about working with Corvus Belli was Gutier and his approach to kind of the lore behind Infinity, because it is so deep, and the research really is there. There's the time, the care, the understanding of what he's taking from real world history and trying to put in the future with his own slant on it. Right. It's any question I had, the answer was there. So I think one of the examples I've given previously is that the first Mantic novel I wrote, I was writing about Paladin orders. And for me to do a 300-page novel about a couple of these characters, you've really got to put it in context of, well, what rank are they within the order? What is the responsibilities of that rank? And therefore, I need to know how the order works. And there was nothing laid down. So I spoke to Matt Gilbert briefly about it, and he said, well, come up with some ideas and we'll go from there. So I wrote the framework for the Paladin orders in a very sketchy sort of way. And then when I suggested the same to Gutier, he kind of laughed at me. And so it was just like, you ain't touching it. Absolutely not, because he's already got it all worked out himself. And so even though there's 5 billion pages of lore out there, it's still probably 10% of what's in his head. Yeah. So he's putting that lore down as quickly as he can, and I think he does get it out there very quickly. But there's still tons and tons and tons of it. He just hasn't got round to putting in the lore books yet. So whatever questions I've got, he's already got the answers, and I think that was one of the slickest, most enjoyable parts of working within that franchise.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to have one person to go to, right, and know all the answers. But at the same time, I found him a great partner creatively, because he was open. Like I would, when I pitched the idea for Team Z, he was like, oh, that sounds great. Try to do this. What about this? And would this work into that? And like, he managed to get almost everything I wanted to do into the Infinity universe in a way that would make sense in the Infinity universe, which I thought was just awesome to work with.
Yeah, definitely. I had all of these ideas, which I thought from in those early days when I had a whole load of stuff arrive in a box of here's loads of lore books, read through that, and I had this kind of scant overview of it, and I was like, I've got an idea, but I can't make it work. Yeah. So I just said, here's my idea, and within one long email, he had made it work. Yes. He just said, change this, do this, and it fits. And he didn't try and crowbar his own take on it. He didn't try and deviate away from what I wanted. Yeah. He made it fit what I was trying to do. He was really good.
No, he's got an absolute gift at that. His ability to take your idea and then fit it into this world that, as you say, is three-dimensionally real in his head is just a real joy to work with. It was fantastic. And so in your process, you talked a little bit about playing the games that you're writing for and whatnot. What do you do when you're like, how do you approach this book? How do you approach the Infinity book when you decide you're going to start writing that of all the other projects that are on your desk?
As in the one I've done, how did I approach it, or the one I'm working on at the moment? That first one. Yeah. With great fear and trepidation, I guess. I think doing the first of these stories in any franchise, and I mean that kind of twofold, as in it was the first one out of the WHP gate, but also it's the first time I've tried to write within that franchise. Right. And that's been 3 times in a row now, and they're always petrifying. Once I've decided what faction I'm going to go with, and that is 99% of the time purely aesthetic on the minis, I just look through the webpage and just go, I really like the look of that. And for me, I love the look of the Pano stuff, which I appreciate. I've had a lot of feedback from the Infinity community, and some people have said, I didn't like your book because it was Pano.
Ooh.
So, I've done the right thing and I've apologized. And I said, you're right. I am your personal author. And I should have done the faction that you wanted. I'm so sorry I did that. I still really do. I've played a bit now and I stick to my guns on that. I'm definitely a Pano player. I really do love them as a faction. So I get some of the models together. I assemble them. I paint them. That gives you a real feel of what you're trying to write in terms of the aesthetic, and when you try and describe the armor, you sort of, just by putting the models together, you know what weaponry they've got, where they're going to stow it, just little things like the fact that Hospitaller, it's on the profile that they have a pistol as a sidearm, but it's like, okay, so where is it? So if they are reloading a multi-rifle and they're caught out, where do they go for their pistol? Is it a shoulder holster? Is it a drop leg holster? Is it any of that stuff? So all of that sort of stuff, I think, matters, and that's just as much as the lore side of it is getting the models. And then once I've done that, it's play a few games. So when I wrote Downfall, and I think everyone who's read it will be able to tell, I'm not a tournament level master at that game, not by any stretch of the margin. But I played as much as I possibly could within the timeline, within my deadline, so that I could try and make the story replicate the tabletop game. The second book, the second Infinity one I'm doing, the sequel to Downfall, I hope it shows I've played a lot more Infinity, and I think it's more faithful to the game.
Okay. Now, so one of the signature elements of the game is it's always your turn, right? And you can have one model take all the activations of your team, which is one of the abstractions that I have the hardest time grasping. Is there anywhere in your novel or the new one where you've kind of like latched onto that, or you've kind of captured that, you think?
I tried again. I always try. Whether I'm successful is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Right. There were 4 primary protagonists in Downfall, and I wrote 2 of them very specifically as high value units, and 2 of them as, dare I say, grunts, or in the vernacular as cheerleaders. They're there to generate the regular orders.
Right.
And so 2 of the characters do fantastical, ludicrous, ridiculous action movie heroics, because I'm trying to replicate the fact that the player is burning all their orders on those 2 characters to make them do cool stuff, whereas 2 don't do that much. They're kind of supporting players. I was certainly trying to.
I ask because I think that is definitely someplace I fell down in Shell game Team Z, because that's not like, even when I play Infinity, I enjoy it. I play Code 1 because it's a little simpler, but it has the same basic mechanics, and that, like I said, that's one aspect of the game that I just can't grasp how that like translates from the abstraction into what a real world situation would look like. And my book was much more, it's 5 or 6 characters that are all pretty much equally powerful or powerless in my book, because they were kind of a bunch of dopes. But and so that's definitely like I struggled with that, and I think that the way to go with that aspect anyway was definitely more what you're describing, where you can have guys that are up there that are maybe take a plinking shot at one point or another and cover fire and whatnot, while the true heroics are being done by the star players, as if you will.
I guess so. And I think one of the things that the differences between Downfall and Team Z, which there are many, and it is those action sequences. And I found I got so much feedback from Downfall, and for every single positive piece of feedback I got a negative saying exactly the opposite. Yeah. So someone would say it replicates the game really well. Someone else would say it doesn't replicate the game enough. Someone else would say it replicates the game too much at the expense of the story. Yeah. So I didn't really have much there wasn't much trending to go on the feedback because so many people have got so many different opinions and they're totally welcome to, and that's absolutely cool. But so people would say an individual might say Downfall is excellent because it replicates the mechanics of the game, whereas I've seen other feedback saying Team Z, they prefer the fact it isn't a slave to the game like Downfall is. If you see what I mean. So Downfall's a battle report with some backstory. Team Z is a novel. So I guess it all depends on kind of the reader and what they want. And I think it's great that the two of us went at it in completely different ways.
Yeah. Well, it's also absolutely, it's up, each individual reader is going to, like if 100 people are going to read it, there's going to be 100 different opinions. Right. And you wade into some dangerous territory when you're writing for an IP that already exists and everybody's already got a bunch of ideas of what it's going to be. And then 2, you're online. Right. And so I don't know. Am I ashamed to admit this? I don't know. I don't really look too much at comments and I know that's not a strong point for me. I don't really engage as much, although I've gone and looked a time or two at trying to, and I guess I don't go on the forums and whatnot. But what I do is I try to talk to people like you guys and get those words out and get my opinion and my attitude. And you're always looking for places to do that, right? You're always looking for ways to talk to the readers where maybe you're not going to get into the nitty gritty of a back and forth. And of course, podcasts are a great forum for that. Watch this. Ready for this? This is a professional at work. So there's never enough, though, podcasts for people to really come to and communicate. So what it would be great to have, it would be if there was a podcast that really focused on the writing, right? On the stories and the writing and the process. Like we've just given a little bit of a taste maybe to the D6G listeners to like authors talking and banging back and forth with ideas with the editor and all this. Do you guys have any ideas where somebody might look for a little more of that content?
That sounds like an awesome idea. I don't know, Brandon, what do you think?
I wish I knew, but fortunately, there is a podcast by Winged Hussar Publishing that just recently released.
Okay, can you tell me, did you check with Vince since the last time we recorded on that pronunciation? Because that's not the pronunciation you were using at the beginning. So I'm just curious. The two of you have me so paranoid now over the pronunciation of Hussar/Hussar, but that's neither here nor there.
It fluctuates. It depends on what kind of a mood I'm in and how quickly I'm speaking. So sometimes if I'm overthinking it, I'll say Winged Hussar. If I'm just talking off the top of my head, I say Winged Hussar Publishing. So it depends. It's tomato.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking at Historicon, maybe Vince was drinking a bit more than usual. There was a lot of socializing, so I wasn't sure. But anyway, so what you're saying is that Winged Hussar/Hussar Publishing has a podcast?
Yes, and just for name convenience and to make it very easy to find, it's called the WH Pubcast. So that's the Winged Hussar Publishing Podcast, WH Pubcast. And it was one of the name kind of came to me because I was trying to figure out something good, and then I was just like, I got to write it down, something quick and simple for my notes. So I just abbreviated WHP Podcast. I'm like, P Podcast, smush it together. There you go.
Well, as I am recording from the McNerdigans pub, I'm a fan of the Pubcast. So I think it's a great name.
This is exactly what I said. I didn't think publishing. When Brandon said that, I didn't think publishing. I thought that's having a good old natter in a pub over a fire.
Indeed. Yep, indeed. In fact, I would love to grab a Guinness right now if I could, but they're about 6 feet further away from me than I would like to move right now because it's cold and I haven't put my heater in yet. But anyway, So what does the WH Pubcast do? So is it just you? Is it you and Vince? Is it you and Mark? Like, what's it look like?
So as of right now, it's just Mark and I. Vince and my sister Allie will be coming on the show to do some historical episodes eventually. How the inception of it came to be is that we've been on a lot of different podcasts through a lot of the different books that we've done. And it's been a great experience. But the common theme throughout all of these shows that we've done, not including yours because you're a special case as you're one of our authors.
Clearly.
But a lot of them, they just don't have the time to ask the questions that I think listeners and readers really want to get into the nitty gritty and the deep dive questions. And like we were talking about earlier, the whole concept of free time and what is that? I don't expect any show I go on, I don't expect the host to sit there and read a 200 to 300 page novel and then ask questions that are meaningful and deep. I appreciate the time that we have to go on the air and just advertise the book. So I came up with the idea that I've been kicking around for a few years, and I'm like, well, I'm the editor. I ask the authors deep questions before it goes to print anyway. And a lot of the questions that get asked by the audience after they go to print, I've already asked in some form or another. So I kind of said to my dad, I'm like, I think I want to do a podcast so that way we can deep dive into asking some, further questions about the novel and get to know the backstory behind the scenes. And of course, I don't know what happened recently, but there's just been this huge resurgence of podcasts. And I thought about doing this before all of a sudden everyone has a podcast now.
Yeah.
And for a while I was like, oh, we could do YouTube and I could do a talk every month about the books we have coming out. And then I said to Mark, I'm like, listen, you and I have a great back and forth repertoire. Would you like to run this podcast with me? And he reluctantly said, I guess if I have to talk to an American for 45 minutes, I guess I'll talk to you.
Oh, nice.
That is exactly, word for word, that is exactly what I said.
But yeah, we've been doing this for about 2 months now. We have 6 episodes recorded.
Nice.
2 are live at the time of when we're talking. The 3rd is going live the first Monday in December, which I think is going to be I think this episode is going to air after the fact. So by that point, we'll have 3 episodes out.
Cool.
And it's been Mark and I going back and forth talking about different writing techniques and writing styles and concepts in the industry. And then we've done 2 author interviews technically. One is with our fellow Kings of War writer, Ben Stoddard. He's come on. We've talked about his upcoming dwarf book. And then we did an author interview reverse with Mark, where Ben and I asked questions about Mark's stuff.
Oh, cool.
And then yeah, we have a few more that we're in the pipeline right now, just finding time to get it done. But we're doing it's a once a month release. We have author interviews are going to be 2 parts. We learned that the hard way, trying to fit it all into one. So we split it into 2 episodes, and those will be releasing bi-weekly. So if you're interested in writing, in fiction, in tabletop wargaming, if you just want to learn more about the industry, or if you want to strengthen your technique, come check us out because we talk about a variety of different topics.
That's fantastic. Mark, what are your thoughts on the pubcast?
I'm really enjoying it. It's kind of nice to host instead of I've kind of been on a few of these podcasts before. The 2 things that are different about what we're doing here. One is when you've got a novel that's coming out, you can't really go too much into spoilers. So it's deliberately vague. Yeah. Whereas here we're also looking back at stuff from, say, a couple of years ago, and we can do a big deep dive into discussing as authors and editors, saying what was going through our minds when we worked on certain passages and what we were trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera.
Sounds like a blast.
Yeah. It's cool to go a lot deeper into the thought process of that, which is great. And I'm also enjoying the hosting side of it. Instead of kind of uncomfortably sitting there and wondering what question's coming next and how I'm going to make a mess of it, I get to put people on the spot and make them really uncomfortable. And I'm much happier doing that. So it's great. It's good.
So it's uncovered a cruel streak.
I think that cruel streak was always there and pretty overt, but yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's showcased it then.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds awesome. What kind of detail, Brandon, are you going in? Like, are you talking about like going from like, I mean, we can talk about it. You could approach it from a bunch of different ways, and I'm sure everybody's going to be a little bit different, but like, are you talking about outlines? Are you talking about editing? Are you talking about a little bit of everything? When you say it's 2 segments, how long is that?
So we try to limit every episode to 45 minutes, but especially with the author interviews, they run over because there's just so much to cover. I mean, and these are people, like, for example, the one we did with Ben. Mark and Ben have been corresponding for years. I don't think they've ever been on a show together. And I've been corresponding with both of them for years. I've been on different shows with both of them.
Yeah.
We have a good repertoire. I mean, all of our authors kind of know each other to a slight degree. Most of our authors know about each other to some degree, but they've never really had a one-on-one conversation. So this has been kind of like the forum to let them talk to each other.
Yeah.
So the first part of the episode is usually our non-spoiler section. So it's to get to know the author, get to know what book we're going to be talking about. And then the second half, it's kind of like for them to pitch. So they're like, okay, this is what's coming out. This is what the book's about. If you like it, read it and then come back and listen to the second part. Or if you don't mind spoilers, like I love spoilers. When I'm really interested in something, I try to look for all the spoilers I can because I just like to know and envision in my head first before I experience it.
Gotcha.
We let people listen to the second part of the episode, see if the spoilers are, enticing to them, and then they can pick up the book and buy it to really get the full feel of it. We go into things like characters, talk about the motivation of different characters, what they were thinking when they were writing certain sections, what it was like working behind the scenes with the game companies, what parts they had a hand in, what parts the game companies had a hand in. And I say the game companies because the first two author interviews have been Ben and Mark talking about their Kings of War novels. So it's kind of like their relationship with Mantic and how that's been.
Yeah.
So it really goes into all aspects from start to finish. And that's what we really try to let people know is, this is what goes on behind the scenes. Because again, I think people think we're a larger company than we are, but we are a small team working round the clock to try to promote and push out good novels
and create an illusion of a big company.
Yes. So this kind of pulls back the veil a little bit and says, this is what really goes on.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. It sounds fantastic. How do I schedule my time on one?
We will be looking into contacting you very shortly. We have to get through some
email.
Exactly. We got to get through some of the up and coming releases that we have soon, but we have definitely talked about it, reaching out to you to get you on and talk about Team Z, Wild West Exodus, Blood and Crimson. Oh, I'm going to forget the title. I'm going to butcher it. Craig, help me. It's
Crimson Sand, Crimson Snow.
That's it. Thank you. I was going to do it in reverse.
It's quite possible that it is in reverse because I butcher it too.
But you've got a wide catalog of Winged Hussar Publishing works that we can discuss. So definitely maybe even a second session.
Ooh, I'll take as many as I can get. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on this pip for the D6 generation, and good luck with the podcast. I can't wait. I'm going to go listen to it all, and to prepare myself for the kind of I don't know what kind of butchery Mark has in store. He seems mean. He's never seemed mean before. This little segment has all of a sudden got me shaking in my boots.
Yeah, Brandon will tell you I'm notorious for it, I think. Yeah.
It is also worth mentioning, though, that you can listen to the podcast on any streaming platform, including YouTube. We're on all the big music platforms, as well as it gets auto-generated to YouTube. It was so much simpler than I expected. So look up WH Pubcast on any listening platform.
Awesome. And you got any other news that you'd like to share, or upcoming projects or books that are coming out?
As I was just mentioning, we have Ben Stoddard's dwarf book, Pride of a King, that's going to be coming out at the end of this month, December. Then I am working on another dwarf book, and then actually John Levy's Earhart, which is another Infinity book, that's going to be launching end of this year, beginning of next year, depending on when the printer releases it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to be working on Jeremy Breckbill, who is an editor for Corvus Belli. His novel is going to be coming out before Adepticon. So if you're going to Adepticon in 2024, look for us. We didn't go in 2023, but we are going to be bringing a lot of new stuff with us this year. So we're looking forward to seeing people out there again.
Awesome. And Mark, what do you got coming down the pipe?
The stuff I'm working on is still Kings of War Armada, bits and bobs. So one of my own stories and the short story compilation, a second Infinity book. Was there anything else? I think that's about it.
There is the Mysterious Order. That is somewhere in the pipeline.
Yeah, I will definitely get round to that any year now. So yeah, just a kind of my own story, not within a franchise that I wrote a long time ago, and then I've dusted it off. And yeah.
I believe
so
I found that
well.
in my deep dive research before this episode.
It does exist. It's just on my laptop. But yeah, it does exist as a manuscript.
Well, that's awesome though. And now that you've got all of this experience going back to it, I bet you can tighten it up and make it feel even better.
Oh, it sucks, doesn't it? When you go back to an old project from ages ago, and it's like I am not by any stretch of the margin the best author in the world, but when I look back at something that it needs a lot of work. It really does, but it'll get there. It'll get there.
I wrote my first novel in graduate school over 30 years ago, and I won't go back to it. I refuse. Yeah, a friend of mine published 10 copies for a wedding, so I could give them away as wedding gifts for a wedding I was in, and I don't think any of us have read it actually. So yeah, it will languish in my memory. But good for you to go back to it.
Yeah, oh no, you've made me feel nervous about it now, but we'll see how it goes.
I'm sure yours is better than mine. Trust me. I did that one and my research thesis for my master's degree at the same time, and I'm pretty sure both of them probably suffered for that effort. But anyway, I want to get you guys out. You've got busy lives, I know, and I want to thank you again. We did have a little technical burp that unfortunately made this a little longer than I anticipated, or took a little longer than I anticipated. And thank you very much, both of you, for your patience and for working with me to get this all back up and running. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you both on the Pubcast soon.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure, Craig.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us on. It's been awesome.
No problem. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
All the best.
And that was the D6G Hot Take.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.